All right, so thank you so much everybody for joining. Really excited to have you here. I'm going to go over just a little bit of information before we kick off our program. Just talk about some future programs that we have on our calendar coming up for next month already. On Thursday, November 5th at 3 p.m., we have Action-Based Change, Overcoming Resistance. So we have a subject matter expert in the space of change management who's going to be talking about a different model when it comes to approaching change and change resistance. So really interesting. So feel free to join for that one. And then on Tuesday, November 10th at 10 a.m., we have solutions for 3 top review success challenges. So really looking at succession planning and being able to execute that from a virtual platform. And we have someone who's also a subject matter expert in that space to share some best practices and tactics on how to achieve that. So those are just 2 of our upcoming events. But we also have just being added to our calendar on November 13th, that Friday at 10 a.m. We have a webinar for a gamification certification. That we will be offering in the month of December. And so the webinar will be to introduce the certification and information around all that. So be sure to look at our calendar. I'll be putting a link of our calendar so you can see future events. Also, what I'll be putting in the chat is the link to our annual survey. So that does end on the 30th of this month, and we ask that you please give us your feedback. We use this information to help us in our program planning for 2021, and we want to ensure that what we're offering is a value for your membership. So please be sure to fill that out, and I'll put that link, like I said, in the chat. Okay. All right, without further ado, let me introduce Omero. Very excited to have him here to talk about how to engage with a simple online simulation that he's kind of already introduced to you through the link that he put in the chat for you to just go in there. So just to tell you a little bit about him, he has spent over 23 years with experience in logistics, distribution operations, and the supply chain roles across multiple different industries. He's currently the Vice President of Manufacturing, OPEX and Supply Chain for Biotix. It's a world-class manufacturer of laboratory consumables and liquid handling solutions. And he's also the president of APEX, the San Diego chapter. So it has a tremendous amount of certifications. Actually, when I chatted with Omero, he told me he loves getting certifications and educating himself and such. So we're very, very fortunate that he has volunteered his expertise and his experience to share with us about using this platform and how to create an online simulation. So without further ado, here is Omero. Go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks so much for that, and hello everybody. Give me a quick yes or thumbs up if you can hear me. Awesome, good, just want to make sure. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start with a screen share here. So hope everybody can see the screen now. And now that I see the screen, I cannot see your faces. So let me figure that out. Okay, we'll power through. So if you want to catch my attention, you might just have to do it in the chat or speak up. Okay, so what I'm showing here on my shared screen is the board that we use in the simulation that's going to be the topic of our conversation today. But before we get to the board, so the first thing is I did put the board link in the chat box. And so if you have not and you desire to, it's optional, it's not required. But if you would like to go in there and feel out the collaborative workspace, do join the board. If you've never gone into Miro before, you just need to sign up very quickly, a quick basic profile, and it'll get you into the board. First thing I want to do is kind of set up the kind of stage or set the conversation for kind of the reason why I started using Miro. So in my day job, I am Vice President of Supply Chain and Operational Excellence for Biotix. And in that role, I am in charge of lean and operational excellence. And so we had launched a new training program, a Lean Basics training program, prior to COVID, and it was an in-person course. It was a one-day course, and at the end of the full day, after kind of learning a bunch of theory, then we actually went into this simulation, which was like an 1.5 to 2 hour simulation. And it was about flow in manufacturing, flow of materials, the ability to kind of transform materials and have it be this continuous flow. And so when COVID happened, we were like, oh crap, what are we going to do, right? And so we had to come up with something to transition to a virtual training environment, but we still wanted to make sure that we continue to have engagement. That was the difficult part in our transition from face-to-face training to virtual training. I'm sure all of you have had the same challenges. And so we came up with this, this simulation that is an online simulation in Miro. So what we call the game is the just-in-time game, because it's about lean principles. It's about producing materials just in time, and it simulates a manufacturing environment. So we set the goals of the game, and the goals are simply to take everything that you've learned in the day and then put it into practice. In real-time practice, you're actually engaging. It's a kinesthetic activity as much as it is a visual activity. And so really the focus of the training is on these principles, the principles of continuous flow, pull, rhythm and flexibility, and quality, high quality. So what we did was we set the stage by describing what the current state is in this simulation. And the current state is that we, as a manufacturing company, we don't have any space. We had to get a second building, as you can see here in the slide here. We have a first building that we have been in for a while. We had to get a second building to store raw materials because we ran out of space. And this is actually a very real situation with our company. And so it was this customized kind of issue to something that's very real to the people that work here. And so we start kind of mapping out the flow of materials. So it goes from the raw material to station 1, and then it goes to station 2. And in both station 1 and station 2, these are manufacturing stations. And there is an inbound and an outbound area. And the reason for that is because our process is not efficient or streamlined enough to really not have an area where inventory sits. From 2, it goes to final inspection, and then final inspection to shipping, and then out to the customer, okay? So what we see here is a tremendous amount of inefficiency in moving materials more than we should or have to, and the fact that we're in 2 buildings. And so what we want to do is we want to solve that. Now, in order to solve that, we have to feel out the current state. So what we wanted to do as well is to highlight or detail all of the operations in the workspace. So for example, there's a warehouse, a raw material warehouse, and a warehouse operator or warehouse clerk will deliver raw material to station 1 inbound and any work in process from the outbounds to other inbounds. And we'll see this on the board in practice, but essentially there is a person, one of the students will be assigned this role, and they will be responsible for these activities, for these operations. In station 1, which is a manufacturing station, that person, that operator, retrieves from their inbound queue. They identify the card, these are cards that are in the workspace, with a serial number. So they say unit 1, unit 2, they type it in, and then they move it to their outbound. So that's the extent of what they're doing. In station 2, they're retrieving it from their inbound, they're changing the color, and then they're adding more text after the serial number. Then we move on to final inspection. So our final inspection retrieves it from their inbound, they inspect, they change the color, and then they add their initials. And so just remember, this is the inefficient way of doing things. So some of you might be asking, well, why do you have to type again? And that's just part of the current state is described as an inefficient state, right? And then finally, shipping, there's a shipping operator and they retrieve from shipping and then they deliver out to the customer. And that's the end of all operations. It's the end of the entire process. Now, when we do this game, we record some metrics. And so the point of recording metrics is because the game goes in 4 rounds. As you can see at the top here, there's round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. And the goal of the game is that as you're progressing in each round, you're adding in a specific principle of lean that will help improve things. And those things are really these metrics up here. So the first thing is lead time. So how long does it take us to move the material from start to finish? Or in other words, from raw materials to when we deliver to the customer, okay? So that's the lead time. Then headcount, how many people are in the workspace actively working? Then there is space. So how much area or space are we using? And the goal is as we move through the simulation to the last round that we reduce the amount of space that's needed to conduct all operations. Then there's quality, which is the number of defects. There's revenue. So revenue is, we define that as $1,000 per finished good that's delivered to the customer. Our cost is 50% of the revenue. That's how much it costs us to make it. And then we also want to measure inventory. So we measure what's in raw materials and what's in WIP. And raw materials are valued at $250 and WIP is valued as $500. Now these values are just for simplicity's sake. Obviously there would be calculations behind the value of your inventory. And then finally, the bottom line is the profit margin, right? So we take the revenue minus the cost minus the WIP and we get our profit margin. So I'll show you some examples of the metrics as we move through. But let me first describe the rounds, okay? So round 1, all rounds are done in 3 minutes. And in round 1, we're highly inefficient. We are pushing material forward, which means that we're just building a lot of work in process inventory and we might not have a lot to show for it. So there's a ton of inventory everywhere. And we're moving in lot sizes of 4. So 4 at a time is what we're moving as far as the items. When you finish round 1, your main type of wastes are overproduction, which means you produce too much, and inventory, which means you have inventory sitting everywhere throughout your factory. So that's round 1. In round 2, we implement one basic principle of lean, which is pull. And so rather than pushing materials forward, what we do is we only grab a piece of material when we're ready to transform that material. So if something is missing downstream, it must be replaced by something upstream. So it's still 3 minutes and it's still a lot size of 4. And in round 2, the main result is wait time. Why? Because now that we're only moving materials at a certain point in time, people are just sitting around. They don't have a whole lot to do, right? So that's the result of round 2. In round 3, we keep the pull principle and then we add in flow as defined by a lot size of 1. So single piece movement. So instead of moving forward of time and batching the work through every operation, what we're doing is we're only moving 1 at a time. So still pull, only when it's needed, but it's 1 at a time now. So the main result here is transportation. Because now that we're moving 1 at a time, there's a lot of work to be done because they're always constantly moving 1 at a time. Each operation takes a few seconds to do, and so there's a lot of movement. So then finally, in round 4, the students in our course get to design a flow line. And what that means is they take out any waste that there is in the process. So they take out space, they take out head count potentially, so less workers in the work area, and we can use those workers somewhere else in our factory. And they also use finally what's called tact. And tact really means that you're producing at a steady pace and every single operation takes the same amount of time. Now, typically when you implement tact, you have to do a whole lot of kind of studying and calculation and reconfiguring of equipment and spaces and things like that. Obviously in the simulation, for simplicity's sake, we define a tact for them. We say the tact is 5 seconds. So what that means is that every 5 seconds, there should be a piece of material bumping to the next operation because it just completed the previous operation. So that's how we kind of do, how we set up the game. And what I want, oh, I'm sorry. So the result here is that you end up just doing quiet work. People don't really have to talk to each other because everything is moving. It's like a well-orchestrated form of manufacturing. And so the best, most improved result is your output, your productivity. You're able to have higher velocity of moving material through your operations, and which means that your lead time to your customer reduces, which is always good. So what I want to do now, actually at this time, are there any questions just on kind of that piece of it, the introduction of the game before we move into the board? Okay. So we will go to the board. And so before I ask anyone to move around in the board, I want to just give some basic kind of navigation overview here. So on the bottom right, you see there's this kind of little window, and you're able to actually zoom in or zoom out from that window. And so if you can see right now, if you can see my shared screen, you see how I'm zooming out and zooming in. And your workspace is actually, it's a really big kind of universe. And so you're able to put a lot of things into your universe. You can, if I wanted to add a Post-it note over here, I could just add it and I could type what I wanted here, right? And so you can do a lot with this application, this Miro collaborative workspace application. It's like a big whiteboard. You're able to do a lot of things. So what I have is right in the center here, I have my boards. And there's a current state board, which is where we start our simulation. And what I also do is, remember I kind of went over the details of what each operator is doing. I have a Post-it here on the left that shows that in case anybody that's in the workspace needs to reference it. Like, oh, I'm the station 1 operator. I forgot what I need to do. Well, it's here, it's on the board, right? Some other navigation things to know about. If you click in the gray area with the grids, you can actually move the board in your own view, okay? Now, some of you might be in the workspace and you might not see my board. If you cannot see my board, you need to go down to the right where the zoom buttons are and zoom out, all the way out until you can actually see my board, and then drag the board into your view by clicking on the gray area and moving it. So I'll show you. If I zoom out, I can click in the gray area and move everything around. And when I zoom in, I can actually get to what I want to see in my own view, right? And so if I want to center, if it's not centered and I want to center it, I click on the gray area outside the board and I drag, okay? So now let's talk about the board. The board itself is what's called a Kanban board. And what that means is that there's columns, and each column represents a status. And so what you do is you take these Kanban cards and you move them as the status of them changes. So you can use this to manage any type of workflow, actually. You can manage, let's say, help desk activities, customer service type of activities. You can say, okay, I have this queue of help desk tickets, and once I grab one, I can move it to the next status. And that status could be, I'm working on it. Then you move it to the next status when it's complete, or something to that degree. Now, what we're using the Kanban board in our simulation, what we're using it for, is to simulate the flow of materials, of actual goods in a manufacturing facility. So where we start is on the left. You have this raw material warehouse, which is the first column on the left. And in this raw material warehouse, we have a bunch of cards, which is our raw materials inventory. Now, if I grab one of those cards by clicking on it, I can move it to the next column, which would be the next station, station 1 inbound. When I'm the warehouse person in our simulation, that's my job, is to move cards over to the next column. So that's how you move cards around. The other thing that I want to show you is how to type inside of a card. The way to type inside of a card is to double click on the card, and you see the cursor kind of blinking in there, and you can type something inside that card. Now, the way for it to stay is to click outside of the card, or for it to click enter, or hit enter, excuse me. And then you can also grab that card and move it over. Now, one thing I will say is, in Miro, sometimes things get a little touchy. The reason I say that is because there's a lot going on. You're making real-time updates in this collaborative workspace. So sometimes somebody makes an update and doesn't click outside the card or something like that. Or sometimes somebody accidentally pastes in a Post-it note. So you kind of have to just work through those issues. If you are a facilitator using this space, you kind of have to just work through it. So if somebody accidentally pastes in a big Post-it note in here, what I typically do as a facilitator is I say, okay, everybody, I know there's a Post-it note on the board. I'm going to delete it myself. And I go and I delete it. Okay. So what I want to do now is I want to give everyone an opportunity to kind of do some things inside the board. So if you would like to, go ahead and grab a card and move it to one of the other columns. So just make sure you can see the board, and you can grab a card and move it somewhere else. Okay, good. I see some folks moving cards over. Good, good. All right. If anybody else would like to try moving a card, feel free. What I also want to do now is to ask everyone to try typing something into any card. Pick a card, type something in. Now, you're also, in your view, you're able to see when somebody is editing a card because it's like this dark gray. Yeah, so someone asked, can you remind me how to zoom? So on the bottom right, you should have like this tiny little window that represents your entire universe. You can actually zoom out using the minus button or zoom in using the plus button in that window on the bottom right. Okay, so I see many of you have moved cards, you've typed inside the cards, great. So the next thing I'm going to show you is, and it looks like, Mark, you're editing a card. If you want to release that card, you just have to click outside of the card. Okay, good. Okay, so next thing I want to show everyone is how to change a color on a card. So the way you change a color on a card is you right-click the card, and when you click the card, actually you can left-click on it as well. When you click on the card, up above, there should be a mini menu that shows up. That mini menu has a circle with a color in it. when you click on that circle for fill color, you can actually change the color, and it'll change the color of the card. So everybody go ahead and try doing that. Okay, good. So I see folks have successfully moved cards, changed colors on cards, and typed inside of cards. At this time, are there any questions for me before we move on? Okay, no questions for me. That's cool. So I see some of you are still practicing. That's awesome. Good. Okay, so the way the simulation runs, again, it's in a 3-minute rounds times 4 rounds. And so what I tend to do is to set up for the simulation, I delete all cards in the columns to the right, because you always have to reset your board to start the simulation. That's our simulation, right? Whatever type of simulation you might be developing, you're going to kind of create your own rules. But for my simulation, what I do is I delete all the cards that are not in the raw material warehouse. And then I make sure that the raw material warehouse is stocked with plenty of cards, because that warehouse person is going to start moving them right away. So, all right, great. Somebody actually added a big Post-it note. So you gave me an opportunity to show that. So I think it's Gwen. Gwen, can you go in there and maybe right-click it and delete it?
Yes, I did that on purpose, of course.
Oh, perfect. Beautiful. So right now you're still editing it, so you're the person that can delete it. But if I were to try and delete it, I could do that as long as you weren't editing it. So I just did that. Okay, so yeah, every now and then as people are navigating through this space, they accidentally just like paste in something. And so the other thing I wanted to show you, since we're on the topic of the Post-its, is on the left side, you have a menu as well. I try to navigate with the arrow cursor, which is the select cursor, but you can kind of paste in a bunch of different shapes and all kinds of things. Post-it notes, shapes, I see people doing smiley faces, right? So the thing that I love about Miro is it's kind of easy to use. It gives you a view, it gives you real-time updates of what everybody's doing at any point in time. And so you can kind of just go crazy with this thing, right? You can tell people just do what you want and annotate, make whatever annotations you want into here. And you see them right away, which is really cool. And the other thing I want to show you is you actually can also use different, so I'm going to go out of the board very quickly just to show you something in my shared, but I'll come back to it. So there's all kinds of frameworks or templates that you can use. There are kind of concept maps, customer journey maps, flow charts, all kinds of things you can use. I actually know a gentleman who's also a lean practitioner in the San Diego area that he uses this for like brainstorming in his events, like Hoshin Conry type of events and things like that. So, so you can set up whatever kind of template that you want. I just happen to have set up a Kanban board, which is what I needed for our simulation. So the way it kind of works as far as the simulation is when I say begin, the warehouse person will grab cards. Oh, I need to change my cursor here. Warehouse person will grab cards, right? He or she will put 4 cards in station 1 inbound. And then at that point, the station 1 person can grab cards and type in what they need to type in, like unit 1. You know, they can, whatever the operation calls for, they're changing colors and all of that. And then as the cards move across the board, everybody's kind of doing their part. and then finally towards the end it gets to shipping, and then it gets customer delivered. And so that is kind of the extent of it's funny because if you just watch the simulation, which by the way, we're not going to do the full simulation because it takes about an hour to an hour and a half to do. If you watch it, you just see everybody working and you see the materials moving in real time from left to right. So the other thing I want to say is I see Karen says, are there good tutorials? So intrigued, but a wee bit overwhelmed. Yes, it's overwhelming if it's new for you. I am actually going to allow you all to continue to have access to this board. So you can go back in and practice whenever you want. And feel free to do whatever you want with it, paste in whatever you want, play around with it. You can also, I believe you can also now create your own boards. And there are some tutorials. I've actually not used them myself, and I don't remember where to go to get them, but I know there are some tutorials that help out with Miro. So this is how I've used it with the Kanban board application. And as I said, the cards go from left to right, but every student has their specific kind of scope of work that they're doing. And there's handoffs. And so in the first round, actually prior to the first round, I tend to do the kind of what we just did, having people move around, navigate, feel it out, make sure that they understand their operation before we actually go into the simulation. Because once the rounds start, you know, it's a 3-minute round, it goes fairly quickly. Every now and then, so I've actually done this probably 20 times now with a real kind of a group of learners from probably from 5 to 15 number in the group. And there's been 2 times where I had to just stop around and say, hey, there's too much of a disruption, we're not able to do this, and then we just restarted the round. So again, it's a little bit, when you have so many people in here editing at the same time, every now and then some sort, like a glitch will come up, something will happen. So you have to just, as facilitator, make sure that you're paying attention to it and you're responding to things that happen. Now that's if you're doing a rapid simulation the way I am doing. If you're just using it to collaborate with your team, you know, process mapping, status of work, stuff like that, it's a lot easier to use in that regard because you're not timing, you know, it's not a bunch of work timed into 3-minute rounds. So any questions at this point? So somebody mentioned there's a help icon that brings up all the tutorials. Yeah, that's where it is. It's the help icon. Where is my cursor? Oh, there it is. Okay, so what I want to do now that you've seen the current state board is I want to show you what the rest of the simulation or the rest of the game looks like after we've gone through the 4 rounds, okay? So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation. So if you're in the Miro screen and you want to see my PowerPoint presentation, you have to go back to the screen that I'm sharing. Okay, so at the end of the game, what they end up doing in round 4 is they redesign the workspace. And when redesigning the workspace, what they do is they take away columns because you don't need all of those columns to have a steady stream of work moving. And so the redesign actually gives us additional space. We don't need the second building anymore. We create a raw material supermarket, and that supermarket is the operator 1 and station 1 actually pulls material from the supermarket. There's no longer a warehouse person delivering materials. And so the flow of goods into raw materials, then to station 1, then to station 2, then to final inspection and shipping, which happens in the same area. and then out to the customer. It's a far more streamlined approach. And if you see here on the right, there's a ton more space to add in more production, right? So if we want to add in another production line, we can go ahead and do that because we've freed up a bunch of space. Now, how does it look from a metrics perspective? So in round one, this is actually, I pasted in an example of one of the real simulations that we did in our course. And in round one, you see the lead time here was 4 minutes and 45 seconds for the first piece. Now, the only reason we got to 4 minutes and 45 seconds was we kept the round going until they delivered the first piece. They were 4 people in the work area. They were using 10 columns. They had 4 quality defects. They only delivered 4 units, which means they only made $4,000 in revenue. Their cost was half of that. But look at all the inventory they had. They had a ton of inventory, almost $10,000 worth of inventory. So their profit margin was actually negative, which is not a good place to be, right? So then in round 2, they improved their lead time. They improved their quality. They still only delivered 4, but they had less inventory. So because of that, they were still in the negative, but it was a little bit better than round 1. And from a lead time perspective, it was almost half the lead time. In round 3, they were able to reduce their lead time to 1 minute and 30 seconds. They delivered double what they had delivered in the previous 2 rounds, 8 units. And they significantly reduced inventory by going to lot size of 1. And so in this round, in round 3, they became profitable again, $2,500. And then in round 4, once they redesigned, they got all the waste out, they were able to deliver in 25 seconds, the first piece. They were able to do it with only 3 people, and they reduced their columns from 10 to 4. So it significantly reduced their space. They were able to deliver 14 units, and they were able to make a profit margin of $6,500 off of $14,000 of revenue. So they significantly improved their profit margin. So the current state board looks like this. I wanted to, or future state board, excuse me. It looks like this. So if you can see my shared screen, I've kind of dragged down to the future state board. Just a raw material warehouse, station 1, station 2, shipping, and then the customer, and that's it. So they're able to really streamline. So now you don't have to move material across 10 different columns. Now you're just moving to 2 stations and shipping, and that's it. Okay, so that's really the takeaway from the simulation that we designed for this course. We looked at a couple of different options as far as the platform to use for this simulation, and we found that Miro was the best for our needs. And Miro, it's a free subscription. You can actually pay, or you can pay for a subscription that I think is like a few bucks a month or something like that. But we've never done it. The free version of it has been enough for us for our simulation. So we've actually gotten about 86 students through the virtual training using this simulation, and they love it. They absolutely love it. It really drives home a lot of the lean concepts that we teach in our lean bootcamp. So at this time, that's all I have to say. What questions do you have for me? No questions. Let's see. Jenny says, have you compared this to MS Whiteboard? No, I have not. We actually, is MS Whiteboard tied to like Teams? Jenny, do you know?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. I think it can be used in conjunction with Teams, but I think it can also be outside of that. I don't think it has to be within Teams.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't used it. We actually, in our company, are doing kind of a migration over to our parent company, our new parent company's intranet, and they use a lot of the Microsoft applications like Teams. I suspect they're going to kind of introduce the whiteboard thing to us at some point. We just haven't used it. Is it similar to this?
I've just started using it myself, and so it seems like it has some of the same functionality, but I'm like super beginner status, so I can't say if it's completely comparable or not.
Yeah, okay. So Bridget asks, other than what we mentioned, any watch outs for user friendliness? Yeah, so what I'll say is there are folks that maybe a little bit less technically savvy when it comes to kind of just computer applications. Some of those folks can have a ton of issues with this. So if you have folks that are not kind of not really technically savvy, at some point they might, if you're trying to do a simulation the way we're doing, at some point they might kind of weigh the whole process down. And so what I do is if someone's having a tremendous amount of trouble kind of getting into the board, finding the board, anything like that, what I tend to do is I tend to say, okay, thank you for trying, but you're just going to have to sit back and watch, and everyone else will participate. Because we do, in our training, it's at the end of like a 7-hour training. So we definitely don't want to like prolong the whole experience for folks. We want to make it productive. And so sometimes I do have to tell people, hey, thanks for trying to get in. Thanks for trying to kind of move around, but just not going to happen. Just watch and learn from observing. And then, I mean, I think, let's see, I mentioned the Post-its, I mentioned the moving around. Every now and then, a card will get stuck if you're using the Kanban board template. Sometimes you just have to let it go, like abandon it. If somebody's trying to edit it and they can't, and it's just stuck there and nobody can touch it, just have them grab another card and continue going. Those are the biggest things I've found. But again, it's aside from that, I mean, I've compared it to others and they were just far more difficult to use than this one. Yeah, Kim, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the interesting thing is this is the extent of what I've used Miro for. I know there's so much more that it can be used for, but I just haven't explored that yet. And I suspect as we continue using it in our practice here that that we'll figure out other ways. We're actually on Monday, we are going to do a value stream mapping event using Miro. So it'll be our first time doing an actual full day value stream mapping event. So we'll see how that goes. Anyone else have any questions for me? All right, I'm going to type in my email address in case anyone does have questions. A lot of times we walk away from these types of events and have a question later. So I want to make sure that I give you my contact information. And you're able to find me on LinkedIn as well. Please do connect if you would like to, and if you're not already connected. Thanks everyone for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Homero, so much. Thank you everyone for spending your lunch with us and for engaging. There will be a recording sent out. I know that there was a couple comments in the chat for the recording. We will be sharing this out. I hope everyone has a wonderful Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.